Good day, everyone, and welcome. So glad to be back with you on a Monday for a live conversation with a great guest who I'll introduce in a second. If you're here with me live, I know you are, so say hello. Go into the comments, whichever platform you happen to be on, and tell us where you're from. Say hello. We'd love to have you do that. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about where we're headed today. But when you are watching us, I hope that you'll just imagine that you're joining us in the same room and that you are joining my guest and I for a cup of coffee. Think about him or us as your mentors. So if you've got questions or comments or ideas, they'll make for a better conversation for Matt and I, and eventually for a better podcast episode as well. And so now that I say podcast, and you look at that up in the corner, you may or may not know that this will eventually be an episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. So, but what I've just said won't be there. That would kind of be silly for people who are watching a podcast. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to count down, and that's when we will actually start the podcast. And I will start then with the actual podcast introduction. So I'm so glad that you're here with us live. Please comment please use the comment section to engage with us. And with that, we're going to start in 3, 2, 1. Would you like a mentor whose journey you could learn from? And even if you have one, how about another? This is the third in a very special series of podcast episodes that we're calling My Leadership Journey. In each of these episodes of this recurring series, I talk with a senior leader, in this case, a CEO and founder, to learn more about their path, their lessons, and their journey towards becoming the leader they are today. Welcome to this very special episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. If you are listening to the podcast, you could be with us live for future episodes on your favorite social channel. You can get all future episodes and therefore interact with us and see them sooner by joining our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to learn more and be in the know. Today's episode is brought to you by Remarkable Development Sessions. A Remarkable Development Session is a webinar for a new world, a world where people want to learn the latest ideas and powerful techniques, but also want to learn together. A world that is different and more disconnected than ever. We know that we learn in interaction with others, but in a fractured and increasingly virtual world, the workshop experience has been shifted to focused on delivering content and leaving application to us as individuals. Even if you love learning from webinars, you have likely thought there has to be a better way to make a webinar better than they are. You can learn more about how we're doing that at kevineichenberry.com/remarkable development and even register for an upcoming session on a valuable skill. And with that, let me bring in our guest. There he is. If you're with us live or watching it, you can see a smiling face. My guest today is Matt Blumberg. He is a technology entrepreneur, business builder, and CEO of Bolster, an on-demand executive talent marketplace that helps accelerate companies' growth by connecting them with experienced, highly vetted executives for interim, fractional, advisory, project-based, or board roles. Matt has been recognized. Yeah? Did you say something, Matt?
I did not.
Oh, I got some feedback. Sorry about that, everybody. Matt has been recognized as one of New York's 100 most influential technology leaders by Business Insider, by Crain's as one of New York's top entrepreneurs, and by Ernst & Young as an Entrepreneur of the Year finalist. Before Bolster, Matt built businesses and worked in marketing, consulting, and venture capital. He is the author of a book called The Startup CEO, and right now he's our guest. Matt, I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome.
Thanks, Kevin. It's great to be here. And I have to say, first, right off the bat, I didn't know that you called this series The Leadership Journey, which I have a visceral, very positive reaction to that as a name, because at my prior company, we put together a leadership development program for sort of mid-level managers and VPs as they were trying to grow their leadership profiles, and we called it The Leadership Journey. So I love it.
I'm a big believer in that. Learning is a journey. Leadership is a journey. So let's just start at the beginning, as the song says, which is a very good place to start.
Very good place.
So So tell us about your first leadership role, whatever that means to you. What was your first leadership role?
I got to think about how far back to go.
See, that's why I'm leaving that to you.
Let's go to high school. There might be something before high school. But the one that just jumped to mind on word association was I became the editor-in-chief of my high school newspaper back when people had newspapers and printed newspapers. So I was a junior in high school, or possibly a sophomore in high school. I can't remember. I think junior in high school. So that was the first one that I can remember. And I was whatever, like 15 or 16, and probably knew nothing about anything.
But you thought you did.
But as a 15-year-old, you think you know everything about everything, right?
So what's something that you, looking back to that, since you haven't thought about that in a long time, what's something that you would say, hey, now you'd say, hey, that's what I learned that about leading in that role?
Well, one thing I learned was that it's great to have other good leaders around you. And I remember the first thing I did when the faculty advisor of the newspaper said that she was appointing me as the editor-in-chief was I appointed a co-editor-in-chief. And, I wanted to work with someone who was on the newspaper staff, and, she and I got along very well, but I wanted someone who had a different group of friends. She was in a different grade, probably had a different perspective on things. And I also knew that the job was a big job and that it would be easier with two of us doing it.
Perfect. So staying with that idea of a journey, in fact, I had this question pre-written, as you can see, as I put it across the bottom of the screen. What's something on your personal leadership journey that you are especially proud of?
The biggest thing that comes to mind is that the prior company that I was at, which I built and scaled over the course of 20 years with a lot of very, very talented executives and partners and investors, my sort of group of executives or senior people over the life of that business, a large number of them have gone on to be CEOs. I don't know the exact number, 10, 8 to 10, something like that. And obviously the other ones have gone on to other leadership roles in other companies, but a good number of CEOs. And I hear from all of them, and there are a couple of them that I still mentor actively today. And I feel great every time I talk to one of them, because one of them will frequently say something to me like, hey, I'm using your playbook on such and such a topic today. So I think, leadership is great, but being able to amplify that by training other leaders is great too. And even as I mentioned earlier, we had this program called the Leadership Journey at our prior company. And lots of people went through that, haven't become CEOs, but they've grown their careers and have paid impact forward to others.
Well, there's something that I know that you believe in, and I was going to get to this later, but it makes sense now based on what you just said. Not everyone has become a CEO. They've grown their career. You like to think, a lot of people throughout our careers have talked about something called a career ladder. You think it's more like a jungle gym. So what do you mean by progressing our careers in a jungle gym as opposed to on a ladder?
Yeah, I mean, it used to be that everyone wanted a promotion, and the only thing you could get promoted into was your boss's job, right? So literally the metaphor of the ladder, like, what's the next rung up on the ladder? I'm waiting until it's open, and then I can have a shot at it. And I can't remember who coined the metaphor of the jungle gym. It wasn't me. It was probably one of my heads of HR at my previous company. But we talked to everyone in the company about thinking of your career as a jungle gym, not a ladder. That your next step could be any bar you could reach. So jungle gyms have lots and lots of bars. It's not like you could reach any bar on the jungle gym, right? You couldn't become the CEO as your next step if you're entry level. You couldn't swing yourself 3 departments over. But the number of things that you could grab onto is way, way higher than the one that's directly above you. And I think particularly in this era of fluidity, of people really valuing skill build, of wanting micro change and micro promotions, not just, all right, I'm in this job for 4 years and then what's my next job? And I think this is true outside of tech also, but tech is where I've spent most of my career, which is a more dynamic ecosystem. The ability for someone in customer success to move into sales, for someone in sales to move into marketing, for someone in marketing to move into product management, for a technical product manager to learn how to become a coder or an engineer. You can go on and on and on. Is tremendous. And one of the things I was really proud of is that we, on average, move 10% of our workforce around laterally to different jobs every year. And that is, it's such a great way to keep people engaged and inspired at work and not bored. It's a great way to keep people learning. Humans like to keep learning. And it's also a really good way to open up different ideas and perspectives in your organization. When you throw a marketing person into a selling organization, like that person is going to come with a lot of institutional knowledge, lighter on the functional knowledge, heavier on the domain, right? But they're going to bring a different perspective to that team. So I've just always found that to be win, 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 win.
So Matt, this is a question I like to ask people who have, achieved a lot, accomplished a lot. What is it that drives you to do what you do?
I love building things. I love creative destruction, not for the sake of disrupting things, but I love building things, and I love reimagining a better way to do things. And whether that's the substance of the businesses that I've been involved with over the years, one of them was reinventing the way people go to the movies. One of them was reinventing the way email works. And now I'm trying to reinvent the way talent works. The sort of reimagining a better way to do something has always been core to what I do. But I also have always applied that internally to the company, not just externally to the industry we're working in. And, I'm always working with my team to fine tune how we do the work we do in ways that are not just more efficient or let us build a more profitable business or a higher growth business, but in ways that let us create a more engaging experience for our team members. And one of the things I always say to people when they join the company in my, sort of new employee onboarding talk is, I hope this is the best job you ever have. And I hope 30 years from now that you'll say that too.
That's a really good, I've never said that to someone joining our company, but I've always thought that. I love that. It's a great way. That's a great way to think about that. What would you say, Matt, is your biggest strength as a leader?
Open to new ideas.
Related to what you're just saying, right? So what advice would you give to that point? Since that's a strength, what advice would you give to someone as a leader when people are bringing them new ideas? Because that not every leader is open to new ideas in the same way. What advice would you give to someone who maybe for whom that isn't a strength, or is trying to come up with a better way to respond or react when that happens?
Respond with a question. Always.
So,
even if you love the idea, if you train yourself to respond with a question, what that means is the ideas you don't love, you respond with a question, not with judgment. And the ideas you do love, you can also respond with a question.
So what would be a great so let's just take both sides of that coin. I bring you an idea, Matt, that you, at least right now, don't love. What's a question you might ask me?
Give me the backstory on that idea. Where'd it come from?
Okay. And one that you do love.
Same question.
Okay. Fair enough. Because I'm guessing people are sitting there thinking, well, maybe they're different questions, but that's a fabulous question. It can obviously work in both.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm an entrepreneur, right? And they say that necessity is the mother of invention. So if someone's coming up with a new idea, where'd it come from? What's the necessity?
Got it. Love it. So sometimes as leaders, one of the things we're starved for is feedback, to really know how we're doing. My sense is, from what the little conversation we had before we came live, and even in this few minutes we've been together, that's probably not been as true for you as maybe for some. So I'm curious, what's the most valuable feedback you've ever received?
First of all, I love feedback. I like a steady diet of feedback. And we've always tried to build cultures of steady diets of feedback. So I'm happy to talk more about how important feedback is, or sort of how to ingest it properly as a leader. But your question was, what's the most valuable piece of feedback that I ever received?
Yeah.
So it was indirect, but I got a piece of feedback from my board in my first CEO role, 12 months in, 18 months in. So pretty early on in my tenure. I was probably 29 years old or 30 years old. And the piece of feedback, and you'll understand why it's indirect, was we think you should work with a coach. So the indirect feedback there is like, something's not going well, right? But it was, we think you should work with a coach. And I was arrogant enough at the time to hear that, not as, oh, I need to work with a coach. What I heard was, oh, I need to do a better job of managing up my board.
You didn't ask that question of what leads you to.
No, I did not. I literally thought, okay, well, I'm great, so something's not coming through. So my board member, who's a VC in New York City named Fred Wilson, who's now I've worked with for 25 years, and is a close friend, multiple companies. So he says this to me, and I said, okay, I don't know any coaches, and he says, great, here's a coach you should talk to. I think you'll like him. Someone he knew. So that person, who PS has gone on to be my coach for more than 20 years, and is phenomenal. I meet with him, and he says, in a very calm, professorial kind of way, he says, so why are you here? And I said, well, I think I need help, learning how to manage my board better. Because, Fred told me that I need to see a coach. I don't know what coaches do. And he said, oh, okay, that's interesting. Why don't we collect some data on that? So I didn't say, where did that come from? But he said, let's find out where that came from. And he did my first ever 360. And he went out and he did, a 360 in a style that I don't do anymore, which is he went out and did deep interviews, like 45-minute interviews with like 20 people. You
got some data, didn't you, Matt?
Oh boy, did I get data. And he did it with like people on my team, everyone on my board. And then he asked me for people outside the company. So like I had him interview my wife and my dad and people who I had worked with in a previous job as well. And then, what I got back from him was a great readout that suggested that perhaps the reason that Fred suggested I work with a coach was not that I'm having a problem managing upward.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was one of the pivotal moments, I think, in my leadership journey was having a wonderful coach who sort of kicked off our relationship in the right way. So, but I have to give credit to Fred on my board for telling me it was time.
I got that. So, and he was coaching you too, right? Mm-hmm. As it turns out. So, you've mentioned it a couple of times, and I know it's an important thing to you, and that is culture. You talked about the culture in the last company, and now in Bolster. We talked about it a little bit before we went live. What have you learned about culture, or perhaps what would you like others to know about organizational culture? I mean, we could have a whole conversation on that, I realize, but what are a couple things that might help people, or that you might want to impart to people about that?
Yeah, I think the one of the biggest, I'll say two big things I've learned about culture over the years. One is that you have to be intentional about shaping your culture. Organizations have culture whether or not you want them to, right? Whether or not you design them. So you have two choices. It can be what it is, and then you find yourself as the head of an organization with whatever culture is there, or you can help shape it. So that's sort of the first learning, is like, you got to be intentional about everything. You got to be intentional about what you wear, when you show up to the office, everything.
Because they're watching, right, Matt? Because they're all watching.
One of my co-founders, Ken, has a great saying, which is, the mic is always on.
And I like to say they watch our feet more than our lips.
That's certainly true. That is certainly true. They watch what you do. So that's the first thing about culture. You have to be intentional about shaping it. The second thing I've learned about culture is that it's not very hard to shift your organization from the culture you drive as the founder and CEO or leader, like the culture that you own, that you're the steward, you're driving it. It's not that hard to shift that to the culture that everyone owns and everyone drives. But again, you have to be intentional about doing it. But
ultimately, you have to do that, or there's a huge disconnect, right?
There's only so much you can do as a CEO. You have a 20-person company, fine, and everyone sits in a room together, fine. You can own the culture. You have 500 people in 12 offices, you can't. And what I've learned over the years is that one of the best things that you can do with a people department, with a human resources department, is to treat them and to treat your chief people officer like one of your most valuable, senior, cherished business partners, and work with that group to essentially to translate all of the things that you want to translate about your culture into basic everyday business process. So it's one thing to write your values out and stick them on the wall. It's another thing to have a checklist of your values, and every time you're interviewing a prospective employee, interview against the values. It's one thing to put your values on the wall. It's another thing to have the checklist of values available when you're doing performance reviews or promotion decisions or compensation decisions. I can go on and on and on, right? It's one thing to evangelize your values. It's another thing to train leaders and managers against your values. So
exactly. And what are the skills that connect to those, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So that's really the biggest thing I've learned about culture, that when you have, I have a slide with a visual metaphor that when you're the founder or CEO and you're the sole steward of the culture, you're like holding up this giant pyramid all by yourself, and you're holding it by the point and you're hoping you don't tip over. And when you have made your culture a product of the system and reinforced by the activities of everyone in your organization, your culture becomes a pyramid and you just happen to be sitting on top of it for that particular moment. But if you got hit by a bus tomorrow, a new person would sit on top of that same pyramid, not have to pick up pieces of a fallen pyramid.
Yeah. And it will continue to change, but it will be guided intentionally when we do that, as opposed to if we don't, as you already said. What would you say, Matt, is your philosophy as a leader? What's your leadership philosophy?
My leadership philosophy is hire smart people and let them flourish. People thrive on, if you read Daniel Pink, they thrive on mastery, autonomy, and purpose, I think, are his three things. And if you hire smart people, and if you are generous with information flow about what's happening in the company, and you're authentic and transparent as a leader, smart people can largely manage themselves to goals. And if you create the right systems and processes around them, they can collaborate effectively with each other as well. And I think that I'm always stunned. I've worked my whole career more or less in small and medium-sized organizations, right? I was a management consultant right out of college, and I worked on a project at IBM. So I kind of know what a big company is like, but I've never been employed by one. But I'm always amazed when I see the inner workings of one, like it's a client or a friend or whatever, at just how much money and energy goes into management, like nothing but management, right? Which is assigning people goals and tasks and reviewing and et cetera. And I understand management absolutely has its place in the sun. But I think, again, if you hire great people and you give them a tremendous amount of information about where the company's going, how they should connect the dots from their role to their team's role to the company's mission, give them information about how things are going, let them make good decisions and self-correct, that you can actually get a lot more done with a lot less management elbow grease and a lot less management cost and a lot more employee satisfaction.
And those two things will go together, to your point. So what's a book that has been meaningful in your career? And maybe there's more than one. You just mentioned Daniel Pink, but what's a book that you would highlight?
Man, there are like 500 of them.
Well, I know.
So
I understand that.
I will, let me pick The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni. Someday I have to meet him. I have, like, this is my answer to this question, and I say this publicly a lot, and I've never met him. I think all of his books are great. They're these, sort of management fables, leadership fables. So they're very accessible stories because they're stories. But the thing I love about The Advantage is it's a book that ties together lots of his other frameworks and other books. It's everything from how you set your goals as a company to the importance of the health of the executive team, to how you conduct meetings. It's all there. It's a great read.
The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni, for one of my books, we shared the same editor. And when I was at his publisher. So that's kind of a connection, although I've not met him either.
Who's his publisher? I have to connect.
Well, it was Wiley. I think it still is.
Yeah.
I believe it still is. So what's something I didn't ask you that you wish I would have? If anything. The answer here can be nothing, Kevin. That's a perfectly fine answer.
Well, you could ask me what I'm doing now.
Well, that's actually my last question. So what are you doing? Where can we learn more? Tell us about Bolster. Why don't you do that?
Yeah, so Bolster is a relatively new company that I started 2.5 years ago with a group of 8 co-founders, all of us had worked together at our prior company for 10 to 20 years. And Bolster was actually the product of our group's obsession with culture and values and the leadership journey. And what we wanted to do was create a business to help other companies, particularly early stage startups or growth stage companies, not Fortune 500 companies. We wanted to create a business that helped those companies scale their culture and their leadership teams and their boards of directors more effectively and also more efficiently. So Bolster is a marketplace. It's an online marketplace. It functions the same way Uber does or the same way Airbnb does. But it's a marketplace where companies can find executives. And you can find an executive for a full-time gig, a part-time gig, a true gig like a project or a coaching session. You can hire a coach or a mentor. You can find a board member. There are lots of uses for senior executives inside of a company beyond the sort of traditional binary, like I've either hired you as a full-time executive or I haven't. And Bolster is a place where you can connect with executives to help you solve any problem you've got at a given moment. So we're really trying to create, sort of a better way, a new way to connect executives into companies.
Bolster.com, everybody. And so I mentioned at the beginning that you also wrote a book. Tell us about that very quickly, and anything else about how people can connect with you. Anything, last chance on all that.
Yeah, thank you. So I write a blog, which is called startupceo.com. And I have a book called Startup CEO and actually 2 others, Startup CXO and Startup Boards. And all of them are designed as like instruction manuals for the first-time CEO. One of them is how to do your job. One is how to manage people on your team and doing their jobs. The other is how to build and run a board. The best way to connect with me is matt@bolster.com.
Matt@bolster.com. It's easy. And compared to some other people's names, it's easy to spell. So now I have a question for all of you who are watching, or most of you probably listening, and that is, now what? What action will you take? Like I promised at the start that you would get a new mentor at a distance for a short while. So my question for you is, what did you take from this? And not just, well, that was interesting, but like, what are you going to do with it? Maybe there's something for you personally or for your organization around the idea of the jungle gym. Or perhaps you need to read the book, The Advantage. Or maybe you want to go to Startup CEO and learn some more because you're in a startup. What was it that you got today? And I gave simple sort of almost binary examples. But what did you take from this that you will go apply? Because until you go apply it, it's limited in its value. And so I hope that you will take this conversation to heart and put legs to it and take action on what you learned. Matt, thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure to have you.
Great to talk to you, Kevin.
And so everybody, this was another special episode. We'll be back next week with another normal, if you will, episode. And I look forward to seeing you then, because every week there's a new episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We'll see you then.